the only people whose moral judgment I truly respect are people working in the tobacco industry, gambling, and of course, arms industry. And in this case, it's not a joke. You truly are one of the most impressive people I had a pleasure of meeting. So, can you just tell the listeners how you came into this most august of industries, the one that actually really does care about world peace much more than all these NGOs promoting goodness and wellness around the world?
I suppose you don't ask me, you don't want me to talk about my starting in the tobacco industry. I think you talk about the defense industry. And interestingly enough, like many things in life, it just started off by chance. I was at my university in the offices of my professor, production automation. And one day the professor walks in and says, this company called and they have some kind of production problem. They seem a bit strange, but why don't you just go and talk to them and see what happens? And it then transpired that this was part of a very historic Swiss arms and defense company, and it was the munitions production part. And they were faced with the classic problem that ammunition is, on the one hand, an object that has to be produced in great numbers, but on the other hand, it is also a surprisingly complicated product. And a lot of the kind of post-Cold War munitions factories that were designed to make hundreds of thousands of rounds every day, they were fully automated and they had actually all gone bankrupt in the 90s. And this company was still alive because they were specialized in producing, 5,000 to 10,000 lot sizes. And so I went there one day, and that actually started off an 18-year affiliation with this company. And it is easy to say that one kind of got sucked in, but one observation I have is that the quality of people that one got to work with, the technical difficulties that one had to solve, they were always very fascinating. And at least for me, there was also an element that it was actually vital, in my view, that Switzerland always has a certain munition production capability. So I have to confess that a great part of my conviction of working in this company was that I always wanted that in any case, Switzerland is always capable of producing the munition it may need to defend itself. That being said, I think our industry, like maybe I dare say also the tobacco industry, is rife with self-denial and lying to oneself. This is kind of the Ibsen's element of die Lebenslüge in Germany, the lying to oneself. And of course, that one says, yes, we actually only do defense and so on, always sounds very easy. But to point out, I do have to say that where I started off, medium caliber ammunition, at least there one can point out it is rarely used against civilians and also very rarely used in a case other than total war. Whereas I do point out that certainly small caliber ammunition and rifle ammunition and things like that, those are, of course, truly weapons of mass destruction. Anti-aircraft, medium caliber ammunition is a very specific subgroup that will essentially, hopefully, only be used against drones and attacking aircraft. But I do confess that it is certainly and also an element of self-denial in there. But for me, the package was attractive, the people, the technologies, and I also say the chance of actually making sure that my beloved country will always be able to protect itself were the driving factors.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I think we'll probably have to return to maybe your experience in the sort of, as a conscript for the Swiss Army, which I guess is
My
is
my
something
my
that's quite
rather
exotic.
dismal military career, yes.
Yeah, but also you're a keen sort of modeler of sort of aircrafts and various things. Did that play into your career choice or?
Actually, not at all. I have always been surprisingly fascinated for want of another word, for weapons and aircraft. And looking back philosophically at my life, um, I have been unbelievably fortunate in achieving or getting the possibility to achieve the things that really interest me. I think in certain cultures, it is even a curse that you get what you want. I think there are certain cultures that have this kind of, don't wish for something because you may get it. But looking back at my life, I am struck at how I managed to do the things that really interested me. And I was very, very lucky in this respect. Like I've always liked aircraft. And um, coming back to my totally abysmal military career where I had considerably more enthusiasm than talent, and I was the lowest level infantry that Switzerland could ever muster. And I then, by hook or by crook, managed to get put into officers training. But one of the conditions was that the army has to organize an internship that I needed for my mechanical studies. And so that's how I managed to get an internship in the government arsenal doing the aircraft servicing. So I love aircraft. So the first thing I got to do was to be in the aircraft doing these things. So I was very lucky. Other things that I always find just utterly amazing is that, and these are stupid examples, but I still find them very strange. Like I have a kind of childish fascination with certain weapon systems. I don't know if it's the name or the shape or the technology. And one of them is very specific. And I was 10 years into working, and suddenly I open a drawer in the company, and there's like a unique cutaway model of this one thing that have always fascinated me. And the statistical chance of that happening is so low. But as I said, I think I was very lucky to do this and to get into it. And the airplanes and models have helped because, as you know from Ukraine, models and aircraft and unmanned aerial objects are slowly starting to dominate the battlefield. And interestingly enough, I have actually, for the company that I used to work for 18 years, I actually built a number of drones that one could test the air defense systems against it. So I'm very proud to say that my rather primitive model aircraft style drones have actually helped make Western defenses better against drones. Everyone does what he can.
Yeah, incredible. And then just as somebody who always had very vague jobs up until I got into podcasting, um, I truly wonder what it is like in terms of like actual engineering working in sort of the defense
Although,
industry. Is it more sort of challenging than maybe in other
no, I,
fields?
I, I think we're maybe traveling a bit too fast. I think we have to certainly look at the moral dimension. I think that is very important. Um, there is a very strange and intimate connection between technology, ethic, and death. I think we can look at that better. But to answer your question is about air defense, which I happen to be an expert, or munitions, where I really truly feel at home. I think these are areas that combine some of the most interesting technical conundrums or technical issues that a modern engineer can actually drop into. Now, I'm saying this, of course, not having been part of anything else. So I'm absolutely sure that if I were to make photocopiers, I would also be struck at the unbelievable intricate technology needed behind it. And there's this very, very beautiful English kind of TV series from the 80s where they talk about the marvels of everyday life. They look at central heatings, they look at lifts, they look at radios and everything. This is, I think, one thing that if there's anything that this podcast can achieve, if one can just highlight the technical wonders of the world around us and also promote young people to choose engineering jobs, everything is fascinating. I mean, even bottles or
Yeah.
the intricate details of closing a bottle with a screw top. I mean, this all seems very mundane, but it is very complicated. So I
By the
don't
way,
in
do
any
you
way want
remember
to.
the name of that British show? I remember How It's Made, which I think was sort of like a short thing about sort of production of usually
No,
like
it's
mass
Tim.
stuff.
The gentleman is Tim Hunkin, and if you
Okay.
go to YouTube, if you have nothing better to do at night, as you see, I've truly reached middle life. But if nothing better to do, you just put Tim Hunkin, and you have this. It's called the Secret Life. So it's a secret life
Ah,
of
okay.
television, secret life of video recorder, and these are they are done with what is so fascinating about this TV series is that they use simple everyday objects to recreate the intricate delicacies of technology. So it's very, very nice to see. But coming back to it, where I feel most at home is ammunition. And for me, ammunition is unbelievably interesting because you have something that essentially has an operational life of very few seconds. So this product is made, it is designed, it is qualified, hundreds of thousands of engineering hours go into it. It is then produced, it is then stored, it is then used in action, and it is 2, 3 seconds it has to work well. And again, you may call me delusional or lying to myself, but it is very important to stress that every time a weapon is used, in my view, it has failed its mission to prevent being used. So if a country buys an air defense system, the main mission of this air defense system is to make it more difficult for a potential adversary to attack you. So you make it economically uninteresting to be attacked. And the moment the system is used, and I really believe this, the moment the system is used, in a way, it has failed its mission to preserve peace. That being said, I'm not totally delusional. If it then really has to be used, it had better work because there's nothing quite as embarrassing as standing next to an anti-aircraft missile that fizzles and doesn't fly off. So, and we always say there's no second chance in air defense. It had better work. But coming back to the ammunition point of view, so, and here also I would like to relate to C.S. Forster, who wrote a very, very nice book. I think it is either The Ship or another one, and there he follows um, the the production of one artillery round for the warship,
Oh.
and how this one round fired actually essentially changes the course of the war. And this is a very nice thing because yes, it is The Ship.
By Ian Forster.
And I recommend, it's actually surprisingly good book, C.S. Forster. And he very nicely says how, the metal and the irons get get I don't know, mined in England, and then the women, because of course the men are at the front, so munitions factories historically are often run by women, which is, by the way, would also be a very interesting subject to talk about.
Yeah.
But so they make this, I mean, they make this artillery round, and it gets tested and done, and it gets shipped to the ship, and then in this one moment it is used. And I see this very much with ammunition, that um, the actual effect of it is very short lived, but the love, dedication, and detail that goes into making it is just mind boggling. And very many people, so I also find interesting is if you look at, I think I saw this ad somewhere that in, how's the computer game called? That are not, just the classic
Um,
shoot 'em up games, the infantry one.
uh,
Uh,
Call of Duty.
Yeah, Call of Duty. I think Call of Duty fires, I don't know, 7 billion rounds of simulated ammunition every day, which is like a million times more than the whole world production of ammunition. So for many people, ammunition is always something that in the movies principally never runs out, is
Yeah.
always there and always works. And I've had the great honor to have been part of a number of my first of all, ammunition developments, but also productions and acceptance trials. And these are things that are statistically very interesting because if you make a 10,000 round lot of ammunition, um, how do you essentially know that it's going to work? Because if you were to test 10,000 rounds, you would indeed have a very good statistical analysis how many rounds are going to work and how many are not going to work. But the problem is by definition, and you don't have very much of the lot left. So
Yeah.
what you do is you tendentially you break down your testing to a statistically relevant sample. And there's a lot of mathematics in there and a lot of knowledge and a lot of dedication. And then the ammunition has to work from minus 50 to plus 60. Then what, at least in Switzerland, was always very, very important is that we have a militia army, which means that the normal person from the street is for 3 weeks every year taken out of his civilian life and given essentially deadly objects to use every day. And here again, philosophically, it's very interesting that ammunition is not allowed to kill anyone till it actually has to kill somebody. So neither the guy shipping the stuff to the front, nor the guy making it, or the ladies making it, nor the soldier using it should be hurt by it. Yet, on the other hand, once it is used, it is intended, of course, to damage and destroy something. So you have this fascinating duality of its nature that on the one hand, it has to be absolutely safe. I can tell you that modern ammunition has to be dropped from 1.5 meters and nothing should happen. Then, if you are loading the ammunition onto a ship, it has to be able to fall 12 meters because the cranes are 12 meters high, and then it has to be disposable, but it doesn't have to be used again. And there are all kinds of vibrational tests that ammunition has to work. And in that one moment, in these 3 weeks that the soldier uses it, it has to be essentially safe. And I had the honor of working with true experts of the government that then accepted the ammunition we produced, and they rightly said, if I put my name under this lot of ammunition, it has to be safe for the everyday use. And I was always very happy to work together with these people to achieve this. But you see, in my rather simple descriptions of it, even now after 10 minutes, there are so many elements of ammunition that are interesting and that other people can profit from. But it is, of course, in a way, something that is designed to kill. So
Yeah.
one has to, of course, also work with that. And I, if anything, I am guilty of being carried away by my fascination. I think this I would accept um, as a criticism.
Yeah, no, but then also, I mean, a lot of great minds of philosophy have actually worked as I guess ballistics experts and probably designers of similar things. I
Yes,
think Descartes,
yeah.
right? He was famously helping, and also a lot of mathematics was developed for artillery.
Is it I'm very happy that you are taking on to yourself to so to speak to endure having to listen to me and then making a podcast and so on. But I'm very honored to say it because you're so right. There are so many interesting aspects. Like one of the things that I is very strange in Switzerland. We we, we once a year have the National Future Day in which the children of the workers and the managers are allowed to visit the company where the parents work. Now, this used to be called the International Daughters' Day, and then they had a kind of gender issue, so they wanted to call it Daughters and Sons' Day, and then they
Hmm.
decided, well, let's just call it Future Day, and so be it. But it was always very funny because we were like, Zurich's or Switzerland's or one of Europe's greatest arms company, and then you had this one day where children would run around in the company. It's kind of almost a Kafkaesque situation. But the interesting thing is that for a number of years, I actually gave a presentation to the children, and it was very interesting to break down the issues into an element that maybe an 8-year-old can understand. And it also there, I was first of all amazed that very many children have very little ethical problems of understanding that you have to protect yourself. This is very interesting. But what I found almost more interesting was when I explained it to them, I always said, look at the human. Look what an unbelievably good fire control system the human body has. We as humans can run, we can take a ball, and we relatively high hit probability, we can throw the ball to somebody else who is also running. Now, if you break that down into what it actually takes to do it, and the favorite example of the Germans is the Leopard 2. I mean, they will sell their soul for the Leopard 2 and they love it. And they're also there on YouTube. There are some epic pictures of a Bavarian soldier putting a big keg of beer at the end of the barrel and the Leopard going through the forest and not a drop is spilled because it's so beautifully stabilized. But in essence, the Leopard 2 with a very high hit probability out of the movement should be able to engage another tank at like 5 kilometers and hit it. But think about it, the human can do that. And we have in our brain an understanding of the ballistics of the ball. We have a lead computation, so we computate where the person will be when I throw the ball to. This, by the way, sounds unbelievably easy, but is in essence the whole quintessence of 80 years of development in air defense is to computate the lead angle that I need to do when I engage an aerial target. So all of this is actually in the human. So I'm always amazed at how good the human is. But as you rightly pointed out, that the questions behind it, the best minds over history have actually, from Archimedes building lenses to defend his country to Oppenheimer doing a bit of math to build a bomb and other people, the greatest and most noble minds have found something in these subjects that are interesting if you accept that they are maybe morally at times a bit daunting. But it's still interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I've always felt fascinated by it.
Yeah, yeah, but that's actually why I quipped that the most moral people work in defense, tobacco, and gambling because they're ultimately faced with, certain moral conundrums, whereas people who work in, a promotion of goods, whatever organization tend to be
Yeah.
blindsided with the effects of their work. But yeah.
Yes, but was it not, please correct me, you're far more erudite than me in this, but was it not Hannah Arendt that pointed out the banality of evil?
Yeah,
That,
yeah, it's
that there is,
Hannah's.
there is an evil, a banality, and you could argue that faced with the reality of the product, it is maybe more difficult to hide in the defense industry than other industries.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
it would be an interesting subject, but I have to say that um, there is there is, in my view, a very thin line between healthy and unhealthy fascination with weapons. And for me, interesting enough, one of my litmus tests that is a warning sign when something goes wrong is something very banal, but is if people give weapons a name. Like I
Mhm.
have had a number of cases where people gave their service rifle or pistol a name, and that has always been a kind of warning sign for me that something has maybe shifted a bit. But I am also looking at YouTube and also other things. I am absolutely shocked at how war disrupt this destruction weapons have seeped into our everyday life. And it's such a shame that we didn't know each other earlier because I had this art gallery that I had an art project called Miss Isles, where I wanted to show just the weirdness of weapons in everyday life. And also, by the way, there's some very interesting research on the phallic symbolisms in the defense industry. Also, one of my favorite examples is that the intercontinental ballistic missiles, they shield and their warheads, and they also have decoys when they re-enter, and these are called penetration aids. So they aid the penetration, and it is difficult to conceive a more phallic symbol than that. But
Yeah.
indeed, I think that um, I am very, very depressed about how like the modern drones give us images of war that in my view, do not belong anywhere. But again, maybe it's just self-denial on my side. Maybe it would be more honest to show the people what the effect is. Like when I was in charge of the fuse production, I was very adamant that at least once a year we detonate a few grams of the stuff we work on, that the people see what intense energy is all in all these weapons. And I think many of the people that have a kind of blatant fantasy from YouTube about weapons, I mean, standing next to a 120 millimeter mortar that goes off, it's not funny. It blows your eardrums out. You get torn apart by the shrapnel. There is a finality in all of this that is not understood if you only see the glorification of it. So this is something that I am very adamant that one has to be very, very careful about. So, every day you have to find your way.
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. And I think in a way, like I was never like a weapons dude, and I was far from a military dude as well. I think partly maybe because of the whole 1999 experience of, being bombed and stuff. So and unfortunately, yeah, maybe it did
Yeah,
not produce the fight response in me. It was mostly the flight
no,
response.
and no, I think if I may say, I mean, I am very deeply honored to actually, since my studies have been associated with Serbian culture, and I've always managed to be surrounded by the most interesting Serbians that one could ever want. Also, my wife, and indeed, it is very, very simple. As a well-sheltered Swiss who has essentially, worked in the defense industry, but it's all been very academic. And my wife, who actually witnessed being bombed. Now, of course, she was not the target of the bombing, but the bomb doesn't really care. And
Yeah,
the,
overall collateral
and
damage.
yes, and it is interesting. I talked to a number of people also from Ukraine. We in Switzerland, we have every 4 months we test the air raid sirens,
Mm.
and for us, this for many years has been a kind of joke. But if you come from a war-torn country and you hear air raid sirens, you go under the table. So, in a way, I have been sensitized by my wife about what it really means to be on the receiving end of all of this. And I think this is a problem. And what is also very interesting in this respect is that for me, and I'm really very adamant about this, the central core of my, should I say, of my participation in the defense industry is that I always wanted that these technologies will be ready for Switzerland to be used to defend itself. But for many years, this was very academic, and suddenly it isn't anymore. And many of the systems that I participated, we always knew that when we were shipping the ammunition, it would never be used. And suddenly this is very different. Now, in the ammunition shipments from Switzerland, of course, it is in this respect different because Switzerland being neutral, it is absolutely clear that no ammunition made in Switzerland has actually till now found its way to Ukraine because of the end user certificate. Switzerland does not permit this because we're neutral. And I don't in any way want to comment on that, but I
Yeah.
do think the amazing thing is that after the leftists for decades have would never believe that the end user certificate is actually honored. It was actually honored, interestingly enough. And even ammunition manufactured in Switzerland 30 years ago that was in Germany, the Swiss government actually prohibited its export. So from that point of view, maybe our morals are still intact. But I do think that talking and also being with my mother, or actually one of my dearest friends, who, by the way, introduced me to my wife, also witnessed destruction and having a house hit by a mortar round and things like that. So yes, it is easy to meander and love weapons and not be associated, and it becomes very difficult when you're on the receiving end. So again, this is life. You develop, you think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And speaking of development, I mean, in Serbia, because we're also a huge arms producer and exporter, I actually think one of our biggest exports are actually bullets in terms of like the value per like export item. But yeah, please check Wikipedia, people. I'm obviously not an expert. It's not as if I studied economics or something like that. But in a sense, like our defense industry is still very sort of state-run, kind of monolithic. I can't say that I know many people who work in it, but I'm wondering how much it is actually changing. We actually have one dude in Serbia who's also a sort of a media dude who kind of has
Mm.
his own startup. But like, is there sort of like outside innovation in the defense industry as much? It's sort of like you can have your own startup.
Also, actually, again, you raise very interesting questions. So first of all, I have to say that I have a very funny side story to this that it is Yugo Import SDPR is the Serbian state-owned weapons manufacturer.
Yes.
And for many years, I actually met representatives of this noble company at the defense fairs. This is, by the way, something that I would so much love to invite you to either the IDEX, which is now in February, but I think we won't do, but we'll maybe together once go to the Eurosatory because for the normal citizen, it is maybe difficult to comprehend that they are defense fairs. I mean, I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
hardly think of a more Kafkaesque concept than having I mean, it's not selling cattle or tractors, it's selling tanks and artillery. But anyway, this is would be, to my mind, a very interesting side podcast. There's also, by the way, some German artists that made pictures and then think that they're so interesting that they, the first people kind of to find out that there was a defense fair. It's all rather pathetic. But the interesting thing is, I
Artist.
met the yeah, exactly. But I met the Yugo import people, and at every time at the defense fairs, we had such fun because the only interesting question was if they are partisan or Red Star
Zvezda.
fans
Yeah.
in basketball. So this was actually the only questions we actually discussed, and then we had a huge amounts of alcohol that was usually smuggled in the barrels of the artillery into the fairground, and they were truly epic meetings. But to come back to your question, I think I'm a very old school guy. So in principle, the big problem in Europe is that the classic defense industry had 20 years of decline after the Cold War. And to a certain degree, defense industries need heavy industry. So you need foundries, you need plants that have machines, you need testing areas, you need chemical production. So it's very, very intense from an industrial point of view. And interesting enough, to my mind, countries like Serbia, where the state-run companies manage to sustain almost a bit better than in the West, they are now suddenly finding that what they can produce is needed in huge amounts. This is mainly artillery rounds. I mean, the use of artillery rounds in Ukraine has, by the way, as predicted, by the way, don't believe any blogger or YouTuber that tells you that there's anything new going on in Ukraine. I mean, we always said that the ammunition needs would be 10 times your worst estimate times five. So you even then you don't have enough ammunition. You
Yeah.
never have enough ammunition. So on any given day at the Ukrainian front, they're firing 10,000 rounds, 20,000 rounds of artillery. And always remember that the German war stock of artillery is still around 12,000 rounds. So that they
So
would run
one
out of
day.
ammunition in one day. But the interesting thing is that companies like Jugendport, to my mind, have a very interesting thing that they can now dust off the old designs and happily produce. But of course, I cannot talk about the Serbian policy of export. But let's just say if they were willing to export it, there would be very many interested people for these things. But now something else happened, and this is that um, people found out that you can decentralize. This is, by the way, also not new. This has been happening since the Second World War. But the amazing thing is that we have outsourced the factories to China. They are making electric engines, flight control computers, and other things, and they ship hundreds of millions of these components everywhere. And then in your cellar, with a certain amount of understanding, you can build drones, FPV drones and other type of drones. So what I find so unbelievably interesting at the moment is that there's this, first of all, there's a kind of gender fluidity. So you have drones, ammunition, loitering ammunition. It's all kind of flowing into each other. There are no clear distinctions. But what you mainly also have, you have the capability of producing lethal weapons in a non-factory environment. And this is a very interesting development. And I mean, in Ukraine, there are not quite school children working on this, but you essentially you have created a market where core components are made in China and other places. They're shipped as components that, by the way, do not fall under export laws because, I mean, electric engine is electric engine. And then you have people making lethal weapons. So to answer your question, I think the world is ripe now for new ideas in production. So I can produce weapons without having a big industry anymore.
Hmm.
That's one thing. The other
Although you
thing is,
might have to rely on China, which, can be a bit of a defense issue. I mean,
yes,
in some
this is
cases.
not only can be, this is a major thing. And it would now, to my mind, not be interesting for the listeners if we go into details, but
Uh,
it, it is absolutely fascinating to see that there are like five technologies that you could turn off and then there'll be like peace the next day. So Starlink is one of them. I think the Ukrainians would crumble in 15 minutes despite their courage and their thing if Starlink were turned off. And certainly if certain engine controllers or flight control computers were disrupted at the moment, one would not be able to produce the numbers of drones that one is doing now. This is clear. But that being said, I myself, as an old infantry guy, and as I said, as one of the least successful infantry soldiers of Switzerland, have to say that wars are won by people on the ground. And my favorite Cold War joke that is so stupid and lame that I have to bring it is that after the big battle, two Russian tank generals meet in Paris, and then one asks the other guy, "Well, who won the air war?" Because essentially it doesn't matter.
yeah.
Once the tanks and the infantry overrun your country, it's all academic how many drones are flying around. And then the other thing is that we just don't know how much of these videos really show success or so on. So it's all in a flow, but I do think the time is ripe for startups. And this is also one reason, and this is a tip that I give any startup at the moment, is that the big defense contractors like Rheinmetall, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, BA Systems, their books are full to the brim. And in a way, they are so successful at the moment. They are so, in a way, also saturated that, like in a petri dish, as they went together and became ever bigger, there's a lot of area in the corners that where, to my mind, innovative startups and people can go. And there's like this colleague of mine, Ends Dynamics, he's developing an interceptor drone, and there is space out there for people that are doing it. The only question is, do they then have the qualifications that normal armies can introduce them? And this is then a long process. So this is something we can talk about another time because I was
Yeah.
very intricately involved in the Skyranger 30, where I'm the conceptual father of, in my view, one of the best mobile air defense systems currently. And there we managed to very quickly show something that works, but now, of course, to finalize it and to make it, survive a German qualification is a bit more complicated. But yeah,
Yeah.
as I said, like the old Chinese proverb, if you wish somebody ill, you wish him to live in interesting times. We are regrettably in unbelievably interesting times.
Yeah. 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 And I will definitely link to your first podcast appearance
Yeah,
while you're
exactly.
discussing
It's
your.
you're always too humble. You inspired so much in my life, and I've always not only do I listen to you often and think a lot about what you say, but your podcast series is an inspiration. And I can only say, having tried doing it myself, it is much more difficult in detail, and always coming up with new content is difficult. So, yeah,
Yeah,
link it. And as I said, I invite you to join me to a defense fair,
definitely.
and that should be a lot of fun one day.
Yeah. I've been to actually one in Batenica, but it's sort of
Yeah,
like
you send me
a
nice
preview
pictures. I have
of
them.
yeah, of like Serbian stuff. So hopefully you join us here. But I guess for the end, I guess sort of what are the sort of most interesting things that you've come across in the past, I don't know, few months? I mean, is Oreshnik something that's like a game changer from your point of view?
No, actually not. I mean, intermediate range ballistic missiles. There's a lot of hype going on. Hypersonics is a lot of hype. I think, I think the interesting thing that one of the things I find very interesting at the moment is that the Russians are very ably using glass fiber cables to control the drones. This, I think, is very interesting, very innovative. It's also very nice because, again, we have this gender fluidity. Anti-tank missiles have actually been guided by wires using electric signals since the late 50s. And then you have the Israeli Spike family or based actually in part also on the German development in the 80s of Polyfem. They have often used fiber optic cables for guidance, and now the drones, in a way, are taking technology from the missiles. So that's very interesting. The other thing that I find very fascinating, but also a bit daunting, is the revival of the anti-tank mine. A kind of in this kind of do-gooder world where we don't have such terrible things like mines. Suddenly, you notice that like the only thing to stop a Russian tank battalion is to just have anti-tank mines. And I clearly do not say anti-personnel mines. That is different. That is rightly forbidden. But classic anti-tank mines that are, by the way, um, at the moment, one of the greatest killers of armor are these mines. That's very interesting. And then there are a number of other interesting things. But as I said, we get inundated with a lot of material at the moment. But these kind of things I find interesting, that the drone technology developing. And you always have this, you see always that like there's a technology and there's a counter technology. So all these things are the same. Otherwise, let me think another moment. What is very interesting?
How about the ideas for sort of mass conscription in Europe? Do you think? I mean, obviously, there are a few other countries that do it apart from Switzerland. There's obviously Greece, Cyprus, Finland. But sort of, do you think it's a good thing? I guess it's such a big part of Swiss tradition that you guys probably don't even think about it not being there. But
I don't know. It's a touchy subject. You see, many of I mean, again, here we could spend hours talking about it, but one of the hallmark of Western weapon systems is that they are super complex. And on the one hand, they're super complex because industry, of course, earns a lot more money selling somebody a complex weapon system, a simple one. But for very many nations, the most expensive commodity on the battlefield is the soldier. It's not the tank, it's not the aircraft, it's the soldier because you have to pay him salary or whatever. And the West has, for the last 30 years, the little money it spent on weapons were always spent on reducing the manpower need. And in Germany, the big problem is they are buying weapons with both hands. And also, by the way, my Sky Ranger, I'm very proud of that. I'm
you should buy
unbelievably
even more
proud of
of
that.
that.
Yeah, once we'll do a podcast only on the Sky Ranger. But and there the problem is that they have to now start getting the people to man these systems. And interesting enough, this is also by the way a typically German thing, is that they didn't stop conscription. They just stopped enforcing it. This is a kind of very pedantic German definitional gameplay. But there are issues about the huge price also on society of just sending people into conscription. And I again here would like to refer to one of the best TV series ever, which is Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. There's a very, very nice episode where they talk about this issue about if one should have conscription. And there he very nicely highlights the fact that depending on how you define it, people may want it or not. So you can say, do you want young people to learn to kill? So no. Do you want young people to be trained to be killers? And of course not. So then, of course, do you want conscription? So the answer is no. So then the next question is, do you want to give young people capabilities in deciding under stress? So yeah, why not? You want to give them something good that they can do, like be fit and have feel together in a community. So yes, of course you're for conscription. It depends how you ask the question. But for me, the beauty of the Swiss system is that an army that is based on citizens always has an intricate level of control, of democratic control. And here I would very much like to also make once a positive comment about the Bundeswehr in Germany. I think one of the greatest and most underrated success stories of the post-war Germany is what democratic, non-fascist, and in a way very kind of honest army the Bundeswehr has become. And they have one of many years ago at the defense fair, they had an unbelievably beautiful bag that they used to give people with the Germans saying, wir kämpfen auch dafür, dass du gegen uns sein kannst. And in German that means is, we are also fighting so that you can be against us, citizen. And I think this is something that if you have an army structure like the Bundeswehr that is really not fascist and really has a clear democratic underpinning, then I have no problem sending people to walk around in the dirt and become soldiers. And by the way, I also did me a world of good, even though I was not very good at it, to go to the Swiss infantry. And I learned a lot of things that I never need in my life, but I had a lot of fun blowing up things and shooting a lot. But in principle, I'm not so negative against conscription, but what I'm very negative is the price that we have to pay from just an economic point of view. And here I would like to end my meandering and rambling with the vital speech of Eisenhower when he left the presidency, where he warned of the military technical complex. And there's a certain truth in it. Every tank that we build is one schoolyard that we're not making nice, and every aircraft carrier that we build is 500 schools that we're not building. So whilst we need a credible defense, we should not glorify it all, and we have to see it in the greater context. But and this has really been my last thought. The price that the country has to pay today that cannot defend itself is also unbelievable. I mean, the damage that has been done in Ukraine, Europe is going to spend decades, hundreds of years to rebuild everything. And I think for the first time in many years, since at least the Second World War, Europeans are waking up to what it really means to have, 60% of your town just reduced to rubble. So again, in this world, one has to strike a balance between vigilance and also a kind of common sense. But as we know, the commodity that is least represented in our world is common sense. So let's just hope that we can get a bit better in that area.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Moritz.
Well, I hope it was interesting. It was a delight to talk to you. And, let's go and look at the defense fair. Let's learn something.